And thank you very much for coming to the second Meat Candidate review for today. So I would like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the lands and waterways in which we pass through and gather today. Today I'm on the lands of the Camaragal's peoples, and like all the First Peoples of Australia, they have cared for this country for countless generations. And I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, recognising their connection to land, sea, sky and community, and we honour their wisdom, culture and resilience. So thank you very much. And before I hand over to Jane, I'd like to introduce the Mid-Candidature Review panel, consisting of the expert panel members, Associate Professor Taryn Sanders and Dr. Hayrine Jang, led by the most excellent chair, Professor Teresa Dickey. And Jane's HDR supervisory panel is co-supervisors Dr. Geetanjali Bhaskar and Professor John Marshall Reef, led by, of course, just as the equally most excellent principal supervisor, Professor Jessica Gao. So without any further ado, Jane, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. Hi, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. Today, I'm going to be providing you with an update of my research. Significant progress has been made on the two studies, which I will report on now. First of all, what I'd like you to do as you're looking at this image on the screen, I'd like you to consider what you see. Is this a scene that you see commonly represented in our society? Does this image challenge or align with your expectations of who works in engineering? In 2021, it was estimated up to 85% of occupations needed STEM skills and knowledge. In 2023, a predicted shortage of 47% in engineering, ICT and science in Australia. And currently only 15% of females participate in STEM fields, and girls are half as likely as boys to aspire to a career in STEM. But how to encourage students into STEM? Our research aims to harness motivation as the driving force to build student confidence, self-efficacy, and value in STEM subjects. Motivation refers to the internal processes that energise, direct, and sustain behaviour, arising from psychological needs such as valuing or choosing between tasks. Motivation influences the decisions people make about where to put their effort and how much energy to invest. So this research comprises two studies. The first, a meta-analysis and a systematic review, which aims to explore those previous studies undertaken in STEM subjects in motivation. And we're really seeking to identify what's been done previously so that we can actually learn from this. And this has been completed. And from these findings, we have developed an online intervention program. And that actually comprises two sub-studies. So we have study 2A, which focuses on during course intervention effects, and study 2B, which focuses on coursework selection. So let's now have a look at the first study. So in order to actually start the first study, we wanted to actually direct ourselves with some review questions. And these review questions gave us direction to identify, actually, do psychosocial interventions really improve students' motivation in STEM subjects? And this was really critical to help us with our design for study 2. Second, we wish to identify which type of psychosocial intervention was going to be the most effective. And third, we sought to identify which aspects of motivation would be improved by these interventions. And fourth, that gender difference. We wanted to identify whether or not there were differences in how females and males were motivated when in STEM subjects. So from these questions, the following inclusion and exclusion criteria were developed. We wanted very specifically to measure quantitative data to really look at those differences across effect size differences in environments in the classroom. We also wanted to use a randomised controlled trial process to really compare against those control and intervention group clearly. And within these parameters, we found the following studies. We found a total of 12,092 studies in the first screening phase. Using the protocol and the list of inclusion and exclusion categories, we then reduced that to 7,853 studies. And this went through the first screening process of abstract and title, and this was completed by myself and another person. In progressing further through the screening process and following the PRISMA guidelines, we identified 361 studies for full screen. After this full screen process, we identified 37 studies. Following this, we began the backwards forwards process, and from this, we found one additional study. Just to cause confusion, from these 38 studies, we had to exclude one study. So we ended up with 37 in the end, and that last study was a different study, and there was insufficient data reported. So we were unable to include it in our data extraction. There were a total of 18,787 participants, and we had 28 studies from the United States, 3 studies from Germany, 3 from South Korea, 1 from New Zealand, and 1 from Russia. A meta-analysis was conducted on all the studies that met that inclusion criteria using the RStudio. We used multi-level meta-analysis to nest effect sizes between studies at level 2 and level 3. Standardized effect sizes were calculated for each study using the Metaphor package. And following this, we conducted the risk of bias using the revised Cochrane's risk of bias tool for random trials. So following data extraction, we found some interesting results, which is pleasing, from 255 effect sizes. And in line with that first review question, we did indeed find that psychosocial interventions have a small positive impact on student motivation. The pooled estimate indicates a small but positive effect with variability across studies. I know it's really challenging to see in this diagram because that is the 37 studies. In looking at our moderation analysis, we used 3 main moderators. So we looked at the intervention characteristics as per the review questions, and we also looked at the outcome characteristics. And as I mentioned before, we explored gender. In addressing the second review question of intervention characteristics, first of all, in order to actually undertake this particular analysis, we needed to categorise our characteristics, and we did so according to personal values interventions. So that included any interventions such as connections, role models. We looked at task value interventions, so that's use in academic tasks. And then we also looked at framing interventions. One of the things that I want to mention before we move to the next series of results was that task value interventions were the most commonly used intervention across those studies. And then the results we found as follows. So it was actually found, as I mentioned before, which is it's such an interesting contrast, was that task values were the most commonly. However, they did not actually have the highest improvement. We found that personal values interventions produced a moderate improvement. In comparison, task value and framing task had smaller, but also still very positive effects. Looking further afield in terms of our review question 3, we found that value, goals, and mindset received similar outcomes, and followed by competence and interest. And so we found that that really led us to consider what we will do for our study 2. So we really want to look at value, goals, and mindset, how we can strengthen those connections in our further application. So in summing, what we found when we looked at the moderation for gender, some really interesting things were that the findings show that there are differences. And we find that when we have a little impact on males, it's really pleasing to see that when we apply an intervention for females, that there are significant boosts in their motivation. So this is now summing up. And what we found that, again, psychosocial interventions had a small to moderate positive effect on student motivation. And we found with the intervention characteristics that they work best when students see that personal connection. And the outcome characteristics, interventions improve value, goals, and mindset. And gender interventions are indeed powerful for supporting female students. So what will we do for our next part of this research? So now we're going to explore our second part, which is the online intervention program. And this comprises two parts. So it comprises study 2A, which will measure the during course intervention effects, and it will also measure that final component, looking to see whether or not we've been able to make improvements in enrolments for our students. So with this in mind, what we aim to do was we aim to use the combination of role modelling and goal setting, thinking further about what our findings were in the first study, and we aim to address both action and belief for our students. So we really wanted to build with the role models, building self-efficacy and showing students that STEM is valuable and attainable. Well, the goal setting provides the strategies and commitment needed to pursue it. So why are role models so important and necessary in this research? I'd like you to consider the role models in your own life, the people who have influenced your decisions and your choices. Were they your parents? Were they your teachers? Were those that you see perhaps on YouTube? As I know my son is always watching these football players on YouTube and watching what they do. So we know that there are many people that are role models. And when we define what a role model is, we articulate that it can be an individual who demonstrates actions or behaviours that we might not know are possible. They can act as demonstrations of competent functioning, showing that not only a task can be done, but also how it can be done effectively. They can also serve as agents of socialisation, guiding an individual's behaviour and attitudes. So when you view a role model, your expectancies of success, as well as your values, can be shaped by these role models by forming connections with your own ideals and your ascribed worth. They can also influence goals that an individual might have by dispensing information that is specific to a subject, as well as highlight more concrete steps. So the situated expectancy value theory guided the exploration of motivation in this thesis. It helped us to make connections with role models that we might see in our environment and then set goals to achieve what we've seen. So when we explore this and unpack this, the psychological components are those variables that might impact an individual's expectancy for success. It incorporates an individual's self-belief, their self-concept, and their self-efficacy regarding how well they can complete a task at hand, their academic expectations, short-term and long-term goals, as well as their belief regarding how they are currently progressing. The socialisation area on this left-hand side here refers to the individual environment pertaining to a person. This includes their individual context, their personal development factors, their previous achievements, their ethnicity, to their perceptions of stereotypes and gender role models. So studying the impact of role models in goal setting is important because these role models represent representation, inspiration. They show students that success in STEM is possible for people like them. And goal setting then equips students with agency and direction. And this combination aims to bridge inspiration with action by having role models, help students to imagine possible selves and spark interest. So this research program includes several components which are new and innovative. All of this study is online via REDCap, and it enables the application of a randomised controlled trial process. And this enables us greater insights into the variability of students within each school, as students have been randomly allocated at that school level. It also provides all students with an opportunity to view the program, which might be prohibitive for regional students. Using multiple conditions aims to identify which condition is the most effective against an active control. So not only will we combine role modelling and goal setting at once, we've been able to provide individual conditions of role model and then individual conditions of goal setting. And finally, embedded into this program is a personalised mentor known as a chatbot, and that's with the aim to boost engagement for our students. So in terms of how we're actually going to do this, we're actually doing this across 6 co-educational schools in Victoria with an estimated sample of 800. So we have 2 regional Catholic schools, 3 independent metropolitan schools, and 1 independent regional school. So this will be applied to Year 9 students who are enrolled in science as a subject. And currently, we have applied this now across 3 schools. And when we talk about the shot, you will see that it says on each of the slides, shot 1 is that first time point that we will be delivering in term 3 of 2025. In term 1 of 2026, we will complete a intervention time point again in that time period across those same 6 schools. And then in mid-2026, we will have a follow-up survey. So when we look at this across our timeline, you can see here that we will have our baseline. We will have a number of key data points. So we will have our baseline and survey 1. We will have survey 2, SEVT. We will have survey 3, survey 4, and that will comprise study 2A, and then we will look at study 2B, which will be that enrolment. So we'll look at the baseline, and then we'll look at that follow-up. And you can see at the top, we've got those time points with the shot 1 and the shot 2. The SEVT survey that I mentioned just before pertains to this particular survey. So this was the main survey and it was applied across the 4 domains. So we're doing STEM, biology, chemistry, and physics. And that's really allowing us to see the individual nuances across each of those subject areas. And I've put a little note up the top there just to highlight that we do know that there are a lot of differences between each of those subject areas. So particular difference for physics, in 2023, we had 18.9% males enrolled compared to females, which was 5.8%. So this particular survey was constructed from Flake, Gaspard, and Kosovich, and we used a blocking approach, which you can see here. So our particular research questions are as follows, and the central question which I set out to answer is, if we actually use that combination of role modelling and goal setting, will it actually motivate our secondary school students greater when they're actually participating in their STEM subjects? And will there be differences for our female students? The hypothesis leads that, in that I do expect to see a combined, I do expect to see a difference in the combined condition of role modelling and goal setting to actually show greater motivation. And my second hypothesis relates to female students, that they too will have a greater difference when they are in the combined role modelling and goal setting condition compared to when they're in role modelling or goal setting or the active control on its own. For study 2B, this primary focus is on selecting STEM subjects for the future. So this is where we really want to see, have they actually changed their enrolment patterns from the baseline to the final follow-up survey? So we hypothesize that again, in the combined role modelling and goal setting condition, it will provide a more superior outcome. And again, for the female students, we also expect to see the same. And again, this is a reminder for 2B, is when we're actually looking ahead for their future enrolments. At each stage, ACU ethics was granted. We had that granted originally in February 2025, and we also then had some amendments approved in July 2025. Prior to conducting any of our main study program, we actually completed this in a pilot school. This was a small independent metropolitan school in Melbourne, and we had 26 students complete this particular, and it provided us with great insights into the technical aspects of the program. So far, we have actually applied our full program to 3 schools, so we've been really busy. Our first school was a metropolitan independent school. We had 200 students participate. Our second school was a regional Catholic school, so that was 4 hours outside of Melbourne. And our third school was a regional independent school, which was 3 hours outside of Melbourne. These are the schools that we have to go. We have another large metro independent school, and we have another regional Catholic school, around 150 expected, and we also have a small independent Jewish school with our intended sample of 50. So this screenshot shows us a snippet of the baseline survey that we presented to students, just to give you an insight into how we're structured so that we can see for study 2B that we have that before and after. This is a sample of the video snippets that we were very lucky to use from my end supervisor, Graham Stock, who hopefully is able to watch this. And they are showing our role models working and what subjects they took in their senior years. And this is the goal setting condition, which gives you an insight that the capability of REDCap, that we're able to use videos and also ask some extended response questions, such as how does STEM relate to your everyday life? So really linking back to forming those values that we generated from that first study. This study uses a 2x2 factorial design. We wish to compare the effects of role modelling and goal setting on students' motivation, and it allows us to test not only the individual impact of each intervention, but also to check the combination, which one produces a stronger interactive effect. It enables us to assess differences, examine both main and interaction effects, and determine whether the combined intervention offers added benefits beyond either strategy alone. As you can see, I'm in the latter part of 2025, and so far progress is on track. Study 1 has been highlighted in red in the top line. Orange indicates the ethics planning. Study 2, you will see we've got green and we've got blue, and the grey indicates when we'll complete the follow-up, whereas the purple highlights creation and writing components. So in terms of what we wish to gain overall from this particular research, we hope to gain a number of things. First of all, we want to identify theoretically whether indeed that combination of role modelling and goal setting influence expectancy and value, providing evidence on how multiple interventions can work together to bridge that divide, and also showcasing differences between the motivation that we might view between males and females. We also want to look at some of the changes that we can bring about in schools as well. We want to look at those in-person mentoring programs that are currently in existence. Can this now offer something more for schools that are outside of that research? And we hope that it can inform STEM school initiatives and guide efforts to reduce those disparities in STEM participation. This whole project would not have taken off the ground without the wonderful team that I have around me, and that is Jessie and John Marshall and Geet. I'll be very sad to see Geet go on maternity leave, but of course I'm so happy for her. And a big, big thank you, of course, now to firm friends that I have that have assisted me along the way, and that's Nick and Annie as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was an excellent, very well structured, interesting presentation. And before I open for questions from the assessors, I have two of my own, mainly focused. Well, the first one is just out of curiosity. Why do you think there was the most studies were from the US you showed? Why do you think that is? Like that was like by a lot, and there were very little studies from other countries. Why is the US so obsessed with STEM? What's happening?
I know, but I actually think, Teresa, what's interesting, and I've asked this exact question of Jessie as well, when I often say, why is there nothing that has been done in Australia, for example? And of course, as in my naivety, and I'm sure John Marshall could probably answer this as well, but I'll say it loosely. I believe it's a lot to do with funding. I think it's a lot to do with drivers on a government level. And I think that from what I've seen, it is really concerning that there were no studies that were listed there from Australia. So this is a real innovation for us to be doing this. I hope it can bring about some significant change. I really saw a number of cross connections with a number of authors that were working together. So there might have been some working. I know Jessie has worked, for example, on some with Gaspard, which were some of the leading authors. And I really can only explain that I think it's resources and funding and direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And the second question I have kind of links study 1 to study 2, and that is overall, you found small to moderate effects of the interventions. So what do you think explains the rest? And how did you take that into account, or how are you guys taking that into account in your intervention study? Yeah.
Look, what I will say first of all is to sort of really open up some of those results as well, is that it's really interesting to dig back down into the inclusion and exclusion criteria and look at the age range. And so one of the things to really highlight were that a number of those studies, a lot of those studies are actually done at the tertiary sector. And that we really didn't mention specific results. And that's really illuminating, is that most of the studies we found were done mostly at primary versus at the tertiary. And then they were also done at one particular subject area only. So for example, they might do maths and they'll do a task value, for example. And so when we look at the results, that's when it's only a small to moderate gain. I think that because we're looking at so many different components, you're not showing that really within significant change. And what I actually found then on a practical level, Teresa, when I was actually going into the schools last week to actually run the intervention, is that age is really interesting as well to dig into, because when I spoke about it with Jessie, I said, look, we're doing this with our 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds, and we've been saying time and time again that this is where motivation drops off. In terms of STEM subjects, we're actually finding that they're completely disinterested in actually doing anything related to school, Teresa. So it's fascinating when we're looking at the meta-analysis, which is covering so many things. It's probably too broad, Teresa. And so that really limits what we're able to really draw on. But I would say from that, it has helped us try to make a multi-pronged intervention so that we can really capture teenage interest as much as possible. So there's so many things in that question, so many things.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll keep some time for others to ask questions. So if I could first hand over to the assessors to ask question. Who wants to go first?
Can I go first?
Yep, go ahead, Hirin.
Yeah. So thanks for a very clear presentation and very structured the presentation. It was very easy to follow. My question is actually of the three, more than that, but this time I will give you just 2 or 3 questions. Already you mentioned something about this, but I want to hear one more time. So what is the implication from study 1 that informs study 2? What is the main message from the study 1 that you applied to the study 2?
So first of all, the main implication, was probably at the bottom, was that what we find is that conducting any intervention for females will have an impact. So first of all, we knew that whatever we were going to do would provide an impact. So that was really wonderful. And it was really wonderful in the second part when we looked at the moderator analysis, was that we identified that value, forming those connections and finding value, was really important for students. So that really helped us with, I guess, confirming this idea of creating a role model and goal setting condition, that it would form value for what they see, and then they can actually create that personalized response. And I guess then to trickle back through those review questions, ultimately to see that indeed psychosocial interventions do have an impact, and hopefully that's what indeed we will see.
Okay, thank you. So another question. So as you mentioned that the intervention in the meta-analysis, the intervention was mainly significant in the females in particular. So I want to hear your interpretation why interventions are in particular significant for female, and the other. Okay, this one go first.
Look, so what they often say is that females from a really young age become quite quickly disinterested. I think that's a double negative phrase. I think females very quickly lose interest from a very young age. And because of what males see often around them, they might see other people that are working in industries that they are already interested. And so for females to be interested by undertaking a psychosocial intervention, I think is wonderful, because we can make progress. That's my interpretation, is that we already have a baseline interest in males. We need to almost invigorate females and to build confidence. And that's demonstrating the value of a psychosocial intervention.
Okay, that's actually your research purpose. So that's actually the good findings.
Yeah.
Irene, can I add something here? Like our result didn't show that like we don't have any effect for male. It's like in a hypothetical pure male sample, you couldn't find any effect. This the hypothetical case. It's not really we don't have any effect for female for male. Sorry.
Yeah, that's interesting. Why intervention is not completely significant for the male. So yeah, that's interesting. And one last question is so although Jane did not present now this result, but according to your report, the combined value interventions was not significant in meta-analysis. So, but you expect that combined intervention will be more effective compared to other single or control conditions in study 2. So then what is your interpretation? So it is possible, because if you give too long intervention, then probably a student to lose their interest.
Oh, definitely. I think, and that goes back to that question almost that Teresa asked. It really is such a fine balance between making sure that the intervention is going to be engaging enough for them, and obviously there's restrictions around how you do that in an online platform. And as I mentioned, tapping into the interest of teenagers in and of itself is extremely challenging. And definitely I have worked in schools for many, many years, and even going into these schools and seeing and being reminded once again that we really need to make sure that we are creating a level of interest for our students. We're hoping that by having the 2 time points that it is sparking that initial interest. We're also hoping that by having a different series of types or different types of interventions, that hopefully it will motivate those students. And that's really the ultimate goal, is that rather than just simply finding use. We're asking our students to see value. We're asking them to aspire. And it's almost like that, I guess, a superior blend of really tapping into multiple motivation constructs. And we saw that definitely in our meta-analysis. We saw that there were some significant results when we looked at values as well, and we looked at goals, and we looked at mindset. So we can see those things together are generating a difference.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Erin. Taryn?
So firstly, thanks, Jane. That was a really, really good presentation, really sort of well structured and well thought out. I have a couple of questions. I want to touch on something you actually just said. So when you were describing the intervention and sort of the innovation compared to the studies you looked at in your meta-analysis, you mentioned that it being online had lots of benefits, but then you also said that you'd been visiting the schools. So can you just help me understand a little bit more about what the structure of the intervention actually looks like? Is it fully online? Is it partially online and then supported by you in person? What's the structure of that intervention?
A great question, Taryn, because what we actually found was that it is purely online. My role when I go out to the schools is to really form technical support for the teachers. So a lot of the time what we have found were that teachers in and of themselves are really time poor at the moment. So it's wonderful that they're actually able to give us this time. However, like anything, if teachers don't have that self-efficacy or they don't have that invested time in the project and they don't have the in-depth understanding of what's going on with when students are hitting roadblocks, I don't know what to do here, where should I move forward, things that are on timers, for example. I'm really there just as a technical support. Just to say, okay, here you go, can you click on this link? And that is it. It's really more from a technical perspective. And we've found that that's been really useful. Simple things like students didn't know what email address to put in, and those things that the teachers might very well have said, okay, this is something that's coming from somewhere else. Here you go, students, you've got 10 minutes, and they might go and hop on games or do something else. So it was really just to be there at, administrative, technical.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so I see for the future that if we'd perhaps maybe made more of an instructional video and trained the teachers, that indeed could change that.
Yeah, or maybe sort of have the teachers with the higher technological self-efficacy implemented. Sure. So for the students, what does this look like in terms of, are you getting a particular class teacher to run this in their normal lesson, as in, like, does this replace a lesson that students would normally attend? How are they actually sort of sitting down at the computer and doing the intervention?
Well, it really is varied, depending on what the schools have available. But typically what we have seen is that they have been in their science classes because they are enrolled in science. That's been our sort of major aim. However, what we have found is that there might have been resistance from science teachers, or they might be super busy to actually do it. So what they've ended up saying is, for some schools, it's in a wellbeing session, like a pastoral care session, where they might have 40 minutes and they're all in a big group together. And so they all log in together. Or they might be in simultaneous Year 9 science classes where they're all in one sort of row, and I can go into each class and get them started.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Teresa and Hayden covered some of the other things I wanted to ask, but one thing I was wondering, just from a methodological point of view, was the decision to, if I've understood correctly, randomize at the individual level rather than at a cluster level. And so I'm wondering two things about that. I'm wondering, firstly, was that consistent with the studies that you meta-analyzed? Were they typically individually clustered? And then secondly, I guess my mental model for how students pick subjects, right? I'll leave the motivation stuff aside, because I think that, like, changing motivation is great, but if it doesn't lead to anything, it's probably not that important. And so choosing a hard-ish outcome of did they actually enroll in a subject, a STEM subject, is is really good. My mental model for how students pick subjects would have some of these psychological aspects sort of lower down than maybe social aspects, like which units are my friends going to take. And so when you cluster, you kind of get the benefit of like a peer group moving into a subject rather than sort of an individual having to disengage from their social group to enroll in physics. And so there would be benefits, I would have thought, to an intervention delivered at the cluster level. So can you just talk about sort of the decision to randomize at the individual level instead?
So again, I would like to sort of step into the defense of teachers working in schools and say that hypothetically, when we discuss career choices and selections, that we would often really advise our students not to pick subjects that their friends are in, or even to worry about which teachers they've got and so on. So just to answer sort of the first part of it is that, and I suppose in answering, let me double backtrack on that. We've got built into our intervention program if-then plans. So we really want them to consider not the selection of subjects based on friends. We really want them to start thinking about other decisions and what's important for them. But to reflect on that first part of what we saw, typically what's really interesting, Taryn, and I'm sure all of you that have done a meta-analysis will see when you start digging into finding out how they actually randomly control trial process within each of the studies, it's actually really challenging to dig in and see exactly how they did that. Some of them, they will say, oh, we just put them into groups. Some of them will say this, this, and this. And so it really became quite challenging to really see and really dig in to how they exactly did it. We didn't analyse the results individually from exactly how they did it in terms of whether they really did it at the cluster or they did it at a school level. We didn't look at that specifically, as long as they had an intervention in a control group and that there was a random allocation, that there was more of that. So that was really important. For us, what we really wanted to look at in our intervention was that we were going around to schools that are quite significantly different in size. And so that really has driven the way that we've actually undertaken the randomisation, just to really make sure. So as I mentioned, the last school that we've got to go to is at this stage looking at between 24 and 50 participants. And so that's a real concern when we're comparing that with a school where there's potentially 200 to 250. And so we're really wanting to make sure that we've got that in there.
Okay, thanks. I'll hand back to you, Teresa.
Thanks, guys. Some interesting questions. And I'll open up to the panel. Please raise your hand electronically because I don't see everybody. Yep, Herb, go ahead.
Sorry, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Great presentation. Very clear. A couple of questions on the online. Did you look at online, the meta-analysis? Did you look at online versus live as a moderator?
No. But it would certainly be really interesting. So what we were really trying to do was, as I said, start, first of all, I think it was our primary focus was to see as many which were actually randomly controlled to really make sure that we've got a clear intervention and control. But no, we didn't look at that. But that's a great suggestion.
But Herb, I doubt that there's very, very few study they're doing online format.
Okay. The moderators that you looked at, you use those to develop your intervention. The differences between those moderators were pretty small. And so the moderation, were they actually significant differences or just aspirational, suggestive?
Look, I'm not sure how to answer that particular one, but I think that they were significant. I'm not sure if you could clarify how they're aspirational.
Well, what I was saying is I would guess that they were significantly different from zero, but probably not significantly different from each other. But at least, the directions were suggestive.
Yes.
Let's see, the issue of the design. I know I did a study with Rhonda where we did some motivational sorts of things, and we were looking at diffusion effects. And diffusion effects are, and so in that particular study, we had a couple of schools where there was no intervention going on at all. And then the rest of the schools, we had multiple intervention groups and a control group. And what we end up finding was that the control group had significant effects that were sort of halfway between the within school intervention and the control school no intervention. And so there were interesting diffusion effects. And it's not that diffusion effects are bad. Quite the contrary, they're good. You want your interventions to diffuse. It's just that it's interesting to whether or not you look at that. One last question: when you have A and B and A plus B, there's different ways of doing that. One is you can take all of A and all of B and put them together, so you have an intervention that's twice as long. Or you can try and maintain the time by taking aspects of A, the best bits of A and the best bits of B, or something like that. How have you done that here?
Well, in terms of the intervention program for A, what we're applying at time point A, we're really asking, I guess it's more the direction that we've got focused on.
No, I'm sorry. When I said A, I was using those as metaphoricals. You've got two components, and you have one component only in one, the second component only in the other, and both components in the third. I was just wondering, is the one where you have the combined, is the time twice as long?
No, it's not. Sorry. Thank you for clarifying it. I wasn't sure what you were referring to there. No, we were specific in saying that it all needed to be of similar duration. So it was really important when we were designing it that it was going to be approximately one period each. And when we talk about that, we know that across schools that varies. Some schools it's 75 minutes, some schools it's about 45 to 50 minutes. So we aim for about maximum 40 minutes.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Herb. Hirin, you wanted to ask another question?
Yep. Thank you. So in your manuscript, you didn't clearly explain how to categorize the different types of motivation in meta-analysis. So that's why I'm just curious about something. Then how did you classify the interest value? So did you classify interest value into the value or interest? Because in your meta-analysis showed that interest was the lowest effect size.
I would be, and I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but I would assume that I put it under interest, if that's the question you're asking. Yeah. So the reason that all those categories were formed, we based those off previous Emily Rosenzweig, and that is how she categorized them. So we stipulated that in our protocol and gave the list of how that was done, and also then with our intervention categories as well. But I believe that would have been interest.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Any other questions from the audience? Oh, Jane, you didn't leave any other questions open. Well done. So thank you to everybody. And I'd ask everybody to log off except for Taryn, Hirin, Jesse, Geet, and John Marshall, and possibly the associate supervisor if he has shown up now. Thanks, everybody.
I don't think so. Thank you.
So we're waiting for Belginda to log off, and also I will figure out how to stop the recording, which I don't think I can actually.
Ricky might be doing a supply run that came.
Yeah, he is. He asked me to
Okay.
stop the recording, but I can't actually.
Can you just go to his office?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to go over and log out. And then Belginda, we need Belginda to log out.